To those people who say that this is a threat to my life, to my livelihood, to my world, they don't have any viable levers to pull to register that discontent. Just like the Luddites did. Look, people using the technologies, they're not playing by the rules. They're not paying attention to them. 10 years of that discontent brewing before pitchforks, or rather the hammers, came out.
Welcome to AI Truth Serum, your weekly antidote to the hype and doom of AI. I'm your host, Greg Shove, 7-time founder and CEO of Section AI. This episode, we're speaking with tech critic Brian Merchant, author of the book Blood in the Machine and the newsletter by the same name. Brian is someone that reminds all of us about the costs of technology and how the workers that are impacted by AI these days should have a voice and how these technologies are integrated into their daily work lives. He and I don't agree on much, but we do agree that as a society and as organizations, we need to manage these technologies to the best possible outcome for all stakeholders, not just investors and executives. So that's what we're talking about. The fusion of AI, politics, and money, the pace at which it's coming, and how to manage the downsides. So here's Brian. Brian, great to see you again. It's been a while. I woke up this morning reading your newsletter, which I have most weeks for the last 3 years. You wrote the book first, right?
Yeah, I wrote Blood in the Machine about the first uprising against automation and the Luddite movement that has been unfairly maligned ever since. It offered a lot of insights that quickly became rather applicable as we moved into this AI era, especially with regard to labor and work and the future of disruptive technologies coming to communities and workplaces.
And what do you want readers to get out of the newsletter? I use it as a way to remind myself of all the unintended consequences of technologies. Is that sort of what you want people to take away from the newsletter?
Before I wrote the newsletter, I was a tech columnist at the LA Times. I've been a tech journalist for 15 years. So sometimes I take a broader lens, but I'm looking at the issues that seem to be undercovered elsewhere in the tech industry. How is AI impacting labor, workers on the ground? Hearing their stories is an important part. I have a series called AI Killed My Job. And then I do original reporting and analysis of what's happening in Silicon Valley, labor and AI.
My sense is it's been a rough few months for you. I mean, you talk about it very openly in the newsletter. It's this intersection of politics, the economy, and technology. What do you think's going on, and why is this storm cloud's got a lot bigger for you?
All of these forces are very much bound together, especially at this moment and for different reasons, right? So the Trump administration has become very interested in AI and has opened its doors to big tech especially. And so we've seen this fusion of the federal government and Silicon Valley in ways that are at least outwardly novel. Silicon Valley has always had a relationship with the defense industry, but now there's a partnership on a much larger scale that we need to understand things like what's happening in Minnesota right now, where a lot of the ICE deployment is done in a way so that it can be showcased on X, on the platform, on social media, and that AI has been a powerful propaganda tool for the administration. Look at its Twitter feed and you'll see tons of AI generated videos and stuff. So this is a key part of the story right now, is this fusion and how the state is using AI and what Silicon Valley hopes to get out of this relationship, or how it's enabling certain parts of the administration's mission and capabilities. So yeah, it's been a pretty fraught moment, especially because certain parts of Silicon Valley have outright gone quite dark. All you have to do is follow Elon Musk on Twitter to know how grim things can be. So yes, it's been a bleak start to the new year at the offices of Blood in the Machine.
As I already warned you, I have a little bit of a bone to pick because I woke up this morning and I didn't follow good digital hygiene. I started my day looking at my iPhone in bed and pretty quickly came across your newsletter, which I read as much as I can. And that sent me down probably a 45-minute rabbit hole and somewhat of a spiral. What a start to the morning. Not as bad as people in Minneapolis, let's be clear.
Yeah, no, correct. That newsletter edition was going to be a kind of like a one and done. I was going to try to write it over the course of a day or two. It's one of those where there are layers and layers and you can't understand what's happening in Minneapolis and like the spectacle of it all and how it's aimed at diffusion on X and social media and things like that without understanding all these layers.
The way I think about it, Brian, is we're clear on the consumer side. Consumers love AI. Now, maybe we might think that planning the holiday dinner or the trip to Florida may not be a good use of AI, but I just think consumers love AI. There's probably 2 billion users out there if you add up all the numbers across all the different platforms. And overwhelmingly, what I hear from consumers is I get value from it. Let's focus it into OpenAI for a moment. They are the largest independent AI company. I consider them the bellwether of the category or of the industry. Kind of what happens to them, I think obviously ripples or waves out pretty fast. My point of view on this, Brian, is that the big tech companies don't want to be moving this fast necessarily in terms of AI, particularly in terms of the build out. Like if you're the CEO of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, these companies, the money's getting pretty real at this point in terms of the level of capital that you're investing.
It's an interesting case and something to consider. And it's something that as a tech critic, I get pushed back on a lot. Maybe it's the number one thing. It's consumers are using it. Consumers love it. I think that this story is a little bit more nuanced than that. I do think there are certainly people who love AI. There are also a lot of people who sort of use AI, right? I don't know if people love Facebook. Do people love Facebook or do people love X? Like they're on there, they feel like that there are needs and maybe they get value from it. Maybe they get professional value. Maybe they get personal value. There absolutely are quarters and there are users. There are power user bases. There are consumers who love these things. There are also people using AI like the way that I used to use Google, or I'm using the AI the way that I would have used Google if I was in a different generation.
It sounds like you're quibbling with my use of the word love.
I am.
But let's use a different word then, because that's a fair question. Did we love Facebook? Maybe we didn't love it. We were like, okay, we got a lot of value from it. But you're not pushing back against the fact that a lot of people seem to be getting a lot of value from AI in their daily lives.
I think that value, or what that value actually is, I think really needs to be interrogated, because almost faster than any tech trend upheaval that I've seen, it's been immediately accompanied with an immense number of social issues. We're just getting already bombarded with. The most recent is the Grok undressing, the CSAM, and then before that, it was the toxic relationships with AI. We're using social media as the corollary, and it's like we just are speed running it, right? Like it took us maybe 5 or 6 years to recognize the full scope of issues. Once social media had been established as a norm, then we said, oh, wait, there's all of these other elements that we really need to deal with that we weren't prepared for. I think with AI, we're getting that whiplash right away. When we're interrogating value, like we have to include.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's an income statement or a balance sheet, whatever. But let's build it block by block, though. So the first block is people seem to get a lot of value from AI. Maybe it's just replacing Google and it's less friction. If you think about travel planning, medical advice, parenting advice, it's clearly a better UI. That to me is the first building block, and it's billions of people.
That alone is a loaded statement right there, because better for who? Yeah, there's a reason that the first sort of story that I saw getting a little bit of viral juice in the opening week of the new year was about friction maxing, because what are we signing away? It's a better UI, but for who? It narrows
that's fair. That's fair.
Amount.
No,
it narrows critical thinking that we have to do. Like
you're taking us over to cognitive offloading. We're going to get to that. We'll need about 3 hours, but just block by block. Okay. People like it. Around 2 billion people. They don't want to pay for it. That is, I think, another sort of building block here in terms of what's happening and what's going to happen, which is consumers, some want to pay for it. And the conversion rates of OpenAI's free to paid users looks like it's 3 to 5%, for example. Maybe 40 million people today, 50 million are paying for it. Maybe that number goes to 100 million. It doesn't seem to be billions. These companies have decided to make pretty good AI free, obviously to get us addicted, to remove cognitive friction, which probably increases our addiction. What you're saying, though, one of these building blocks is, but we're getting the negative consequences, because there always are, or almost always are with technology, of this kind of power and sort of a widespread use. I love the way you phrased it. We're speed running all the negative impacts as well very quickly into our lives. So I think that is an important sort of building block here, which is, particularly without any regulation, it seems there's some value to AI. A lot of people seem to like it and get value from it, but holy shit, the negative consequences are coming fast. And I just want to fast forward the business model, because if consumers can't pay, this is what we always knew. Enterprise have to pay, companies have to pay, companies and governments, obviously. And governments are now buyers of AI. And as you noted, I think today in your newsletter, most AI companies have taken that each a $200 million contract from the DoD. It's just one example. And there's a lot more, I'm sure, in terms of contracts being signed or about to be signed with government agencies. Organizations have to pay. My sense of this, Brian, is the party stops. It's a race between enterprise adoption, essentially, enterprises being able to put these technologies to work and see real ROI, because that's the only reason they're going to pay for it. Rational CEOs are not going to keep buying AI unless it actually works for them and makes their companies more efficient. The race is between that And I think OpenAI's bank account, meaning the current rate of development is driven by OpenAI. If they slow or falter, I think everybody else slows at the same time because they don't need to go as fast. So I think about this year as a pretty telling year. If OpenAI can raise that capital, the party probably keeps going because the enterprise adoption and ROI from AI is nowhere close. That's how I've simplified in my mind what this race is, this current race, which is capital depleting. When do investors run out of patience and when do enterprise actually get value? Because they're the ones ultimately that have to pay the bill. If you're going to recover $1 trillion of compute or data center build out, it's the Boeings of the world and the Targets and all these big companies have to be paying for AI. Consumers don't seem willing to pay for it, at least when you give it to them for free, which is what's been happening last few years.
That is the challenge. It hints at something that I'm sure your listeners probably are already aware, that just like the burn rate of AI is tremendous. Like you have to factor that in to the equation and you have to factor that into the business model. If you're going to have a free tier, then you are going to be losing a lot of money on just the compute. So what do you do with that? I think that's one issue with the way that this has been introduced and one great challenge for the AI industry. Now that there is this expectation that there is going to be a free tier, that this is a free service, that it's going to be free without ads, right? We've seen some experimentation, and that's the way that, for the last 20 years, how software companies have typically gotten away with offering free products is ads.
Ads and upsells, basically. Yeah, listen, I think that lower the price of inference, lower the price of AI, great to get people hooked. I think you're right. There are all these companies right at this moment where, holy shit, we've probably been too generous for too long now. How do we start to raise prices, right? And I guess that's the other way out. The other way out is to, I think, make it a smaller business by raising the price of AI. And so only the most serious use cases and the most serious consumers and the most serious companies will actually pay for it. That might be the way out, meaning it's actually a smaller business, a smaller industry than we thought because the cost needs to start to rise.
One way to put it is that the future is here. We need to get on board. The other is, wait, why is this future here? What need is this going to fill within our organization? Instead of going top to bottom and saying this could be faster or that could be faster. But it does seem very top down, top led. Executives are talking to each other saying, like, this is the future. We've decided this is the future. We need to get AI rolling. That's the buzz on the street. We have FOMO about this. But I also think that we risk manufacturing kind of an artificial demand.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, listen, by the time the call ends, you're going to have to be a little more positive. I'm getting ready to raise more money. And my pitches start next week. My Series B starts next week.
Look, I will say the number one company from the beginning that has been most enthusiastic about AI have been the Accentures, the McKinseys, because they know that they can use AI in their organization. Absolutely. And then they say, look, we eliminated headcount and we're going to claim expertise on this frontier and sell that.
Here's my perspective on it. I think we're entering a new era, and I call this the super company era. And I think super companies are companies that are built from the ground up using AI. I think they will be able to grow faster with less people, so they're going to be more capital and headcount efficient. I also think they'll be very disruptive in terms of business models. When you think about disruption as an incumbent, you're most worried about someone that disrupts you with a better product and a better business model, meaning a more client-friendly business model. And so I do think we're starting to see evidence of super companies emerging. If Google and Microsoft and Amazon were the super companies of the last generation, so to speak, the cloud era, or whatever you want to call it, I think that some of them will make the turn, so to speak, and become super companies in the next generation, which I think is the AI generation. And some of them won't. And a bunch of startups will actually become very enduring and profitable companies and will be our next super companies. And those are the only ones that get capital. So if you're an entrepreneur or a company builder or a CEO, I think you've got to figure this out. That's the part A of my answer. Part B is we use these technologies every day at Section. It makes us incredibly more productive. A lot of employees are like, I like my job more now because I am able to outsource some of this work to AI and focus on other types of work that I find more interesting, more challenging, and so on. We are growing fast because we pivoted to AI. We're doing it, though, in a much more efficient way with less headcount and less capital. We'll get to these benchmarks like $100 million in revenue faster with less people. And that's my job as a CEO. And frankly, I think it's the job of a public market CEO as well, if they want to get access to capital.
I would say that there is like a grain of salt necessary because there is a built-in interest in, again, expressing to these companies that are your clients that this is the way to go. A lot of other companies have tasks that are in completely different domains. And so maybe it's not going to be totally exportable as a model to all, although I understand the play and the bet. The other thing that I would say is that, there are two issues. It could go belly up. It could be too concentrated, a burst of capital that becomes top heavy, and it turns out that this model does not work. I think that would be a bubble bursting. There's too much build out. You can't figure out the way the economics work in the long run. And AI, as you said, maybe ends up being something that's a little bit more limited. But let's also say that it does work, and that the future is super companies, and that these are the only ones that can get capital and that can say, hey, you can do all this without as much labor. I also do see a future in which maybe some version of that also bears out. But when you look at what's happened over the last 20 years and the last generation of super companies that you're talking about, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, who became these now $1 trillion plus giants with a lot fewer workers than the super companies before them, you see this trend where I think at some point you also have to account for, what is this end game? What are we doing here? Without an accompanying social transformation, you're going to have an extremely top-heavy economy that's concentrated between some of these super companies that don't have a lot of employees. And where's all that other wealth going? It's concentrating at the top. And at some point, you have to account for not just the theoretical implications of this, but the material and on the ground implications of a bunch of angry people at these super companies who are hoarding all of the money and the capital. And it's not necessarily theoretical.
I agree. But let's talk about that then. So what is our advice to a leader?
Look, can I just say real quick, this precedent is outlined in my book and newsletter, Blood in the Machine.
Okay, let's talk about it. That's how I encountered you the very first time, probably 3 years ago, which is, okay, this guy's thinking about the other side of the coin. He's thinking about what happens if this does play out and is successful, and how do we not just pick up the pieces 10 years later, but to some extent plan for this, or at least think about it and try to plan for it. Let's start with the first question. Where's this responsibility lie in your mind? Is it with government? Is it with these corporate leaders? Is it with the heads of these AI companies? Is it shared? Like, where do we even start with accountability for figuring out the downsides and preparing for them in some ways? Like, where does this live, the responsibility?
It's an all of the above question. I think the CEOs and the AI CEOs are not doing themselves any favors by continuing to distance themselves. You know, the occasional sort of prognostication that AI is going to erase 500,000 jobs.
The dire warnings every year about job loss, just to assuage some conscience.
The cynic would say that it's also plugged into sort of a discussion of the power of his own product. And even like Sam Altman, who these guys used to talk about UBI, they don't even talk about UBI anymore. The social dimension has almost completely fallen off. I think if there was a sincerity about their belief in how transformative this would be for society, if anything, for like the longevity of their project, instead, we're seeing the exact opposite, right? They're lobbying the federal government to install a moratorium on state level lawmaking, saying, no, we should be exempt from all of this. This should be as anti-democratic a project as possible. So that is what at least Meta, OpenAI, Google have boots on the ground, and we've seen the tighter integration with the Trump administration and the federal government. And so that's part of that project as well.
Brian, let's update everyone on the state of legislation, right? We have the executive order from the Trump administration. Is it chilling state regulation? Obviously in California and New York and even Texas and Florida, there were initiatives moving to state houses in terms of AI legislation. Can you update us on where we're at right now?
Yeah, so the quick update is that Republicans in power and the Silicon Valley lobby, with a few exceptions like Anthropic, mounted this campaign to try to get a moratorium installed on state level lawmaking. Both times it was tried to be inserted into bills, once with the budget omnibus and once with the defense bill. That came up short. That failed, in part because the base of sort of Trump world got angry, and folks like Ron DeSantis and Josh Hawley and Byrne
Steve Bannon, even
Steve Bannon, but they still came through with this executive order, which again, it's a chilling sort of mechanism. Can't really stop states from doing this. It can threaten to pull broadband funding. It can threaten to sic the Justice Department, or the threat of federal lawsuits on states that do this, to just make the going more difficult.
And do you think it's like they want zero oversight? Or because what about the regulations around like child safety and pornography and deepfakes? What about just the basic regulation around health and safety, so to speak? Is that all gutted, or could be? Or do you think states will be able to make enough progress even with the basics, keep our children safe?
I think that if Silicon Valley had its way, it certainly would have gotten a blanket ban. I think that the tenor of the outrage over some of these cases where chatbots were seen to be encouraging suicide or violent behavior. You can see some of the defiance both on the right and the left, where DeSantis said Florida has its own state AI Bill of Rights because it viewed that the cultural implications of letting AI run rampant were bad optics for him, or it's maybe an opportunity to set himself apart. One of my predictions for AI in 2026 is that the politics are going to become a lot noisier and a lot more pronounced. And it's going to be a little bit of a political football because there's a lot of anger right now, especially impact on kids, AI generated content, the deep fakes, and the data center build outs.
If your electricity bills go up 20% overnight, that's noticeable.
So that is to say that the politics of AI remain very much in play and remain very much active despite these efforts to issue this preemption or this ban on state level lawmaking. Right now, there are a lot of lawmakers who still see opportunity in not just seizing the AI issue, but also confronting the Trump administration. So in states like New York and California, I think we can expect to still see some AI legislation, if only to kind of dare the Trump administration into an unpopular sort of fight. And I don't know, that's speculative, but I expect we'll still see some. I think the greater issue is that in California, another presidential hopeful, Gavin Newsom, is quite allied with the tech industry in a lot of ways. And so he's actually, even before the executive order came through, he was vetoing a lot of the AI legislation that was coming through, laws that passed both houses in California that would do things like ban an algorithm from firing people outright. And so there was a No Robo Bosses Act, and he banned that one. He vetoed that one, rather. And so there are still a lot of impediments to the realization of these laws. And I think it will have a chilling effect in some regions, but I don't expect the general project of trying to put guardrails or to legislate around AI to be stopped completely.
I would suggest the context is tough now. When you look at how much of GDP growth was contributed or can be ascribed to data center build out. They're stuck with this narrative of it's a race against China and there's only going to be one winner. Domestically, in this moment, they're also stuck with, oh shit, it's generating so much economic activity. If you slow it down in any way, you could obviously soften the economy and maybe even push us into a recession. So the context is tough, I think, for some of these politicians, even the ones that are well-meaning, balanced, and thoughtful about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I do think that it's probably not a great thing that so much of our GDP is just data center build out and the infrastructure of AI companies bound up in whatever NVIDIA is doing. But that's where we are now. And you're absolutely right. Politicians are stuck with this difficult issue.
It's just become so layered. It's cultural and it's economic now, and it's safety. It's surveillance, right? AI is now proxy, I think, for big tech, or maybe big tech's proxy for AI. I'm not sure, but and the surveillance economy. It's hard to parse, right? It's hard to pull apart these layers, and that's what I'm struggling with. Where do I focus and develop my own sort of cogent and thoughtful point of view? I think my reaction some days is just, okay, focus on my family, focus on my businesses, head down. If I raise it up and really consider all these things, I get stuck. How should I be thinking about what action or point of view should I develop? I want to therefore circle back to Luddites. Because I would argue, if you think about being a Luddite as, I'm not going to participate in what's happening, I think that is a risk as an individual. Tell us about Luddites and how we can learn from that to maybe inspire how we behave today.
I always start every discussion of the Luddites this way, is that the Luddites were not anti-technology. They were opposed to the way that these technologies were being used either against them or without their consent to disrupt the fabric of their communities and societies. That meant in their day, factory owners building up a 6-story factory on the outskirts of town, buying up a bunch of automated machinery that really wasn't all that much more advanced than what a lot of the Luddites at the time were using in their homes and their small shops. It was really about using the idea of mass production, of mechanization, as a means of justifying lower prices and more quantity and selling more stuff. The Luddites were really against factorization. They were against exploitation, essentially, right? And so today, most people who have issues with AI, the issue is not with the technology itself. It's not with the LLM fundamentally, but especially from a labor perspective, we're getting into the questions of how is this technology being used? Has it been trained on the works that I have published over the years and that are an important part of my revenue stream? And then is it going to be used to produce competing products in the market? Is it going to mass produce art? Is it going to mass produce text? Those aren't the largest sectors of our economy, but those are the people who've been most angry about AI from a labor perspective. And the issue isn't that these things exist. It's an issue of democracy, of democratic deployment, of do I have a say in how this is being used? Do I have a say in how this technology is affecting my community, my market, my identity? For a lot of people, that answer right now is no. The terms of deployment, the way that these tools are developed, are all set by a handful of companies in Silicon Valley. And so this is where we get the tension, right? And it plugs back into everything that we've been talking about. These CEOs, this executive class, they want to exempt themselves from democracy. They want to do the exact opposite. And there are some people, as you said, that will find these tools and these technologies very useful. And there are others that will say, hey, this poses a direct threat. To those people who say that this is a threat to my life, to my livelihood, to my world, they don't have any viable levers to pull to register that discontent right now. So that's why I think that as long as things proceed along this trajectory where we have truly an anti-democratic project right now, and people who are getting angrier, and as you said, the job market is bad and discontent is brewing, I do see previous echoes of Luddism. And what can I say? I sympathize with the people who are shouting about all these issues and getting met with a brick wall, just like the Luddites did, but they spent 10 years trying to go to Congress or Parliament rather in the UK at the time saying, look, this is what's happening. People using the technologies, they're not playing by the rules. They're not paying attention to them. And they got laughed out of town time and time again. So it took 10 years of that discontent brewing before pitchforks, or rather the hammers, came out.
So are you saying the outcome of that, the Luddites were able to bring enough attention to the issues that the legislation was net positive at that point?
First, the parliament laughed them out of that. Then they tore it up. Then they said, you are totally at the whims of the industrialists. Then the hammers came out. Then there was what some historians describe as the closest that England has ever been to a true civil war, with domestic occupation of the industrial districts, real guerrilla assaults on the factories. And so there was a decade of immiseration and violence. And then after all of that, in part because of all that turbulence and calamity, and because much of the public sided with the Luddites at the time, that, yes, eventually out of that mess came reforms. At the time, it was against the law to organize a collective, a union. That got overturned, and they got some labor rights, and eventually there were limits on child labor and things like that you can trace back to the Luddite uprising. It took an awful lot of suffering and immiseration and, as you said, unrest before that was possible.
It feels like to me that we're being told one option, which is don't worry about it. We'll be on the beach collecting UBI. It's going to go swimmingly well, and we'll all be getting our UBI checks and not worried about it. So that's not likely to happen. And then there's this decade of immiseration, as you call it, and real turmoil, out of which perhaps could come what we need, which is hopefully some effective solutions. Is there a middle ground? Because those two seem pretty extreme, obviously.
Yeah, there's absolutely a middle ground. It depends on a lot of things happening, but there has to be an earnest effort to bring labor to the table on board to make this process more democratic instead of doing it the other way. We're fighting against a lot of trends that in some ways AI can be seen a culmination of, which is a hollowing out of union density over the last decades, stripping of labor protections from American workers, which has been a decades-long process to where it's a tiny percentage. Of course, it's not perfect, and maybe unions could be obstinate where there might be productivity gains to be had. But without a union, in a lot of cases, it's just completely up to the management's whims. This is how you're going to use it, and you're going to like it. Those workforces, yeah, they may have strong opinions, but they also have the most on-the-ground knowledge and institutional knowledge about how their jobs are done and where AI might help them. If they are empowered to decide when and how to use AI, the outcome is going to be a lot different than if management...
I agree with that very strongly. This top-down AI is doomed to fail. The idea that enterprise AI is stalling out, I think, is in large part because it is being done top-down, and consultants and SWAT teams are being dropped in and building agents that don't actually understand the workflow that the humans are currently doing and the quality of that work, and therefore the agent actually can't deliver on that, hence all these AI pilots stalling out and stuff. I spent a lot of time trying to counsel executives on how they should lead in the age of AI and what are their responsibilities to their companies, which includes their investors, to their employees. What would your advice be to an executive at a large enterprise who's been told by the CEO, you've got to get AI working here and make sure that we can withstand a competitive threat from an AI-enabled company? Pick any number of industries and categories and companies companies, I think they're going to be all threatened at some level relatively quickly by AI native companies that come after them with better products and services and, frankly, more disruptive business models. What should they do?
So with the caveat that we just don't completely agree there.
That's fair. Okay.
I think that there are products that are not going to be better. I think that there are some that will be better. There are some that you can make faster, surely. I would basically practice a philosophy of AI, of radical democracy among the workforce. I would say, look, here are our resources. Here's what's going on in the AI world. Here's going to be an open forum in which you can attend if you would like to. There's going to be a hands-on session where we can show you the AI capabilities. We're going to talk about the companies and their ethics and whether or not using these companies' products is something that we want to do. This is kind of antithetical to a lot of companies are running right now. The prevailing wisdom in Silicon Valley now is, you know what, we went through the 2010s and we sat down and listened to our employees when they had problems. And, that just caused us a lot of headache. But I do think that if you're going to address a workforce or a company, then the key word is ground up, worker led. How do they want to do this? Because not only is that going to make them the happiest, not only is that going to lead to a more cohesive approach to AI, but you're probably going to get the best results too.
Yeah, listen, I'm buying the ground up part. Most of what you said, I mostly buy, but what you described sound like how socialists run companies. And as a CEO, there's a point at which no, we're going to fucking do this because I say so.
I'm talking to a CEO here.
Not easy times for, I don't think any of us. As always, Brian, I appreciate you acting as at least my conscience. And I think for a lot of other people, I appreciate Blood in the Machine, the book and the newsletter, and you trying to consistently remind us that this is not going to go according to plan, and certainly not the plan generated in Silicon Valley.
I appreciate your having me on and having these conversations. And I get a lot out of it too. It's interesting to hear about how you're thinking about these things as an entrepreneur and a CEO, and to go back and forth. A lot of these points, we agree on the shape of things, and then sometimes we disagree as to whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, and we converge on others. I hope that we can recognize it could still yet go something closer to according to plan. Thanks so much. Appreciate you're doing this. You certainly don't have to air the critical voice.
Thanks, man.
Cheers, Greg.
As expected, Brian and I don't agree on everything, but we do agree that we're speedrunning AI into our lives, both at home and at work. He would like us to go slower with more empathy and more regard for the impact of AI. I want us to go faster, but also with empathy. And as long as investor capital is flowing, the pace of these technologies will not slow down. What I appreciate about Brian is he reminds me and all of us that we can influence how these technologies impact our lives both at work and home, not to just throw up our hands and assume that big tech knows what's best for us. So a reminder that leadership matters in this moment, and that includes all of you guys listening. Thanks for listening to AI Truth Serum. Next episode, we're speaking with my good friend and brilliant technologist, Ed Ortega. We're going to talk about the truth behind AI agents and their ability to automate human workflows so we can put into context all these dire predictions about job loss. In the meantime, you can find me online at gregshove.com. If you got a second right now, leave us a rating and review. I need it. It's a big help and will help people find the show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk soon.